Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's time once again for Catalog and Cocktails. It's your honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime product nerd, data nerd, all the nerds at data.world. Also joined by co host Juan Cicada. Hey, Juan.
Tim, how are you doing? It is Wednesday, middle of the week, end of the day, and really late where our guest is today. And oh man, I have been super excited about this conversation. First of uh, all the guests, as people know, is Ole Olesen-Bagneux, who is the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog O'Reilly book. He's the author of the upcoming Fundamentals of Metadata Management and has been the person, if you have not been listening to what this metagrid thing is, then you've been living underneath the rock. And Ole is now joining the very exclusive group of second-time guests, and it's not because we want to recycle guests. There's really these very important topics that we need to go cover. Ole, it is our pleasure to have you back and chat with you. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Juan. Tim, thank you for having me on again. It's a great pleasure. And yes, I also have something to drink. It's not as honey based as Ramona would have liked. It's Armagnac from the southwest of France, a brandy. But I think it's appropriate, and it's really appropriate in a warm summer night with a small cigar.
A
So
small
that's what
one,
I'm drinking.
or one that will last long. You'll enjoy.
Yeah, well, obviously, you want one that lasts long, obviously.
Well, this is great.
For
So
sure.
we're jumped into our Teletos. That's what you're drinking. And Tim, what are you drinking today?
Today I'm drinking something a little less fancy. I just have a scotch and ginger ale. So,
Well, I'm gonna go
what about
off
you,
and
Juan?
so I took looking at the comments, and I think Ramona is there. Hey, Ramona, and she said something about a honey inspired or in cocktail because we're talking the meta grid and honeycombs and stuff. So I actually have something in tribute to today. I'm going to call it the metadata mezcal. And for those who've been listening, I've been drinking a lot of Aperol, and actually, here's the evidence. I finally finished the bottle of Aperol that I've had. So it's empty now, so no more Aperol cocktails. But this is an Aperol cocktail with mezcal and honey. And damn, this is good. So I'm actually like, I think I get more mezcal, make it smokier. I put some lime in it, probably a little less lime, more honey, but you can mix it. So
I'm glad that
uh,
metadata has a proper cocktail now.
we can
Yeah.
keep. So and I want to toast some opening news I found we heard right now. So Ole, cheers to you for being the opening keynote at Data Day Texas in January. And as I've been kind of writing on LinkedIn, like that is the place to be to start the year. And get a 15% discount or get a discount using the code honest no BS. And so cheers to that. I want to toast to that.
Congrats, Ole.
Yes, thank you very much. Definitely. Thank you.
All right. So warm up question. So we're talking about demystifying the meta grid. What is something that you've demystified recently? What is something you've learned personally recently that you've been able to demystify?
Well, preparing for this question, I could only come up with a geeky answer. So my answer is the beauty of decentralized, federated social media like Mastodon, Blue Sky. That is really something that I believe very firmly in a more in a better social media, better for the end users, more serious, more true. I think they have a lot of potential.
That's super
There you go.
interesting. I've been trying to decide whether or not I'm going to join some of these other services. I'm on Threads and Twitter, but there's like Blue Sky, there's Mastodon. Do you recommend if folks are trying to learn a little bit more about the decentralized social media, what should they try? Should they try out Mastodon?
I think Blue Sky has a slightly easier user interface.
Hmm.
I just got very confused with Mastodon. I tried being on Mastodon, but it didn't really appeal to me. It was too like circular. The user interface in Blue Sky is simple, so I
All
prefer
right.
Blue Sky.
I'm going to
Yeah,
give that a try. I'm going to sign up.
Yeah, I joined it. It looks like Twitter, like X, exactly like that. So
it's built by ex-Twitter people, right? The best from Twitter, I dare say. So they are pretty sure about what to do and what not to do. They're building everything themselves. It's a really crisp modern platform.
That's awesome.
everything is it's really promising.
All right, well, that's the call. I think a lot of people have been moving their conversations there. So, anything you want to add, Tim? Because I'm thinking about mine. Like, I don't. I think it's the first time I don't have a good answer to this question.
I'll answer it, and we'll see if you come up with something in the time you're waiting. I'll give a personal example. I figured out how to make a pour over coffee, so I have like a little pour over coffee set now, and I can drip my hot water on there slowly and carefully in spirals. So that's something I demystified recently.
Great.
All right, I think I'll owe you guys mine, but I want to
right.
let's dive in because there's so much. All right, so honest, no BS. So here's the thing: Ole and I met. I mean, we had him on the podcast. He wrote his book here, Enterprise Data Catalog, and then we've really hit it off over the years. I never forget. We when we did the podcast, when you were on the podcast, I was in Paris by coincidence, and we walked around Paris, walking around talking about stuff, and we've really had a lot of these intellectual conversations over the years. So I feel very comfortable being very direct with you. And one of the things looking at the whole metagrid conversation, I've said this to you before, is that it is very abstract. And when you get into it, it gets even more abstract. And then it's your image. Like, I'm confused. And I know many people are confused, but sometimes many people are getting it too. So honest, no BS. Let's go freaking demystify. What is this metagrid thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's great we have an hour. But I also realize I need to communicate more. I mean, the concept is really getting a lot of attention, and therefore I also need to be more crisp in my communication, obviously. So it's a fair question, and I think to answer it in a short way, as short as possible, I think it's important to take into account that I have a definition of metadata that is perhaps a little different than what we have discussed in the data community. And I have a practitioner's experience, an end user's experience. And so people may think that it's very abstract and it's very ivory tower-ish, but in fact, I'm writing from the position of the end user, from someone in the big office landscape trying to make sense of an enterprise IT totality. And that's really my point of departure. Now, the metagrid itself, there's a lot of things it's not, but basically, if you really want to boil it down to what it is, without the context around it, but just what it is, it's a set of decision records, architecture decision records on how to define certain things in the IT landscape in certain metadata repositories, and how these metadata elements change over time as they are transported to new repositories to leverage other capabilities. That comes with a document, a diagram, perhaps a small data set, but by no means something that is called a metadata product or anything of that of that nature. So basically, a metadata or the metagrid itself is not a lot. Basically, it's something that is very, very simple, in fact. But it's also something that, and that is very abstract. Perhaps we can go into it.
No, I think that is a great starting point, because I think I've seen you use a similar definition to this in a few different places, as you talk about kind of these different repos and these different purposes. And maybe, as I've kind of digested this, and I'm curious if you feel my distillation kind of hits the mark or not. Like, what I kind of think is that it seems like you're defining metadata in pretty broad terms. And I think that people often do, actually, that resonates with them, but they don't always connect the dots. Sometimes they think of metadata a little too narrowly, especially in the data field, right? We think of it as like, oh, like columns and tables and dashboards, and those are metadata, right? And maybe you're like, oh, maybe there's a policy or something like that, right? Like, people sometimes they'll go that far, but really, when I think about how you're talking about things, Ole, it sounds like you're really saying, like, metadata, it's being collected in a lot of different ways from a lot of different systems, and there's a lot of contexts in which that metadata is being collected for certain purposes. Like, for example, log information that's for security purposes or something like that, right? But then
Mhm.
some other tool wants to leverage that metadata too to make smart decisions. And so the meta grid is really about how these different kinds of metadata is being collected for certain purposes and then how they interface with each other. Is that kind of a good
Yeah.
way to think of it?
Yeah, sure. Sure, Tim. I think that's very much the point. So again, to be concrete, right?
Hmm.
Um, what I describe is the relations between specific technologies, metadata repositories that carry out specific tasks to manage an IT landscape. So if you have so in my book, Fundamentals of Metadata Management, I describe 4 domains, but this is all very flexible. You can define the domains as you want. I don't care. But I lay out what I think are reasonable domains. I have 4 domains that consist of IT, data, information, and knowledge. And this is not an abstract way of thinking about the refinement of data towards information and knowledge. It's really specific domains with specific technologies. In the information management domain, you, for example, have an information security management system. That is an actual system. As Chief Information Security Officer has such a system. It depicts the IT landscape, mitigating the risks of cyber attacks against that IT landscape, right? So it's a specific technology that does that, but it will depict the same reality as an endpoint management system that I classify as belonging in the IT management domain. So that is another repository that lists all the laptops and smartphones and servers and what have you in the company. And so if these are not aligned, when you depict an IT landscape, you will most likely be subject to cybersecurity risks because the CISO is acting in complete darkness, right? So it goes back to the definition of what metadata is. I see a lot of books, many books. The data management book of knowledge is perhaps the most prominent example, but you have a lot of books listing subcategories of metadata as if that is a definition of metadata, like operational, technical, business, all this. But really, that has nothing to do with metadata because metadata can be anything we want. Anything can be metadata. So it's not a very precise definition. It's just listing subcategories. So if we need to get closer to a definition and really think what constitutes metadata, my argument and my definition is that metadata is not about what it is. Metadata is about where it is. Metadata needs to be 2 places in once. Your beautiful technology, data.world, is an example of a metadata tool because it exposes data that also sits somewhere else. Metadata fundamentally is 2 places at once. That's the key to metadata. And if we only apply a thinking where we say that metadata is something that we manage from the bottom up, meaning from the specific table, saying the metadata of this table is this, and we want to expose that. If that's the only way we manage metadata, then we do not contextualize what we're doing. We do not know if another repository or another technology exposes the same kind of data for different purpose, because we have a lot of technologies delivering different capabilities in trying to understand an IT landscape. A data catalog, preferably powered by a knowledge graph, is one such technology, right? But you have many technologies exposing not only the data, but the entirety of the data landscape, the IT landscape. But that is perhaps where the confusion arises in a data catalog context, because like many other technologies, data catalog software inventors have this idea that we can expose everything in the IT landscape. You can discover everything in our technology. And that is both right and not right, because you do not want to leverage the capabilities of a configuration management database. Data.world should never be that. It should never be ServiceNow, right? It can be a lot of things, but not that. So you leverage something specific a specific capability that creates a specific meta model, and that is the universe wherein you find yourself, right? So I'm hoping this makes sense. I'm still working on my pitch.
I think this helps to illuminate a lot, and actually to connect something that you said, where you said, it's both in place within that system, and also it is elsewhere, right?
Mhm.
For discovery, for manageability, right? We were pulling up this question here from Jenna, who asked on LinkedIn. Is the standard definition of metadata equals data about data not sufficient and accurate? To connect that to what you say, you would say it's part of the definition, but it's not the full set of what metadata is, right?
I would say that there's certain context or understanding that needs to be accepted underneath that definition if we are to go along with that definition. And that is that metadata as data about data implies that data are two places at once. If not, it is not data about data. So that may sound very intellectual, but the consequences are very low practical. Like if you're mapping applications in, say, an enterprise architecture management system, and you're also mapping your applications in a data protection officer's small registry of how you're processing sensitive data, then if these people work in isolation, you're doing the same task twice. You're not doing it the same way. You're not creating a consistent truth across repositories. And then subsequently, you're wasting your time and creating confusion. So I agree in the definition if we accept that underneath that definition is a fact where we need to accept that metadata fundamentally is two places at the same time. That's a very I've been discussing this at length with you, Juan, but this is a very library information science way of thinking that metadata really is two places at once.
So if I go back into the examples, right? So like you take your book here, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this section right here that says all this information about the copyright, the publisher, and all that stuff in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
That metadata here that lives in this book, but at that same time, that metadata has been consumed by so many different other places, systems like Amazon and like Google and everything that helps me search. Let's find that. So in that, just to kind of make this tangible, that metadata lives in this book, but at the same time lives in other places, which it helps you then find this book.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. That's the purpose of metadata. The purpose of metadata is to make something retrievable in a place where the thing at source is not located. So my book, in this case, is a physical thing that you want to purchase and you want to have on your bookshelf in your home. Or it could be a file that you want to have on your laptop, right? Doesn't matter. But the thing is that it's at source somewhere, the data, and it's also somewhere else, because if not, you can't find it. That's the role of a data catalog, but of many metadata repositories, right? They do that for various purposes. And I think that's the confusion here. The confusion is that when I communicated about this, at least, is that people think, well, metadata must be universal, right? It doesn't belong in a specific system. It's just something that's universal, abstract. You can put it on a list, and that is all. That is correct. But the problem is that when we manage an IT landscape, we do it through technology, and we do it for specific purposes. We leverage specific capabilities. You cannot avoid that. I mean, I don't think a software vendor of any kind would say that my technology does not have a purpose. I mean, I couldn't find any software vendor that would say that, right?
All right. So so I think one of the sense of even my personal confusion, which I've now clarified by talking and spending a lot of time chatting with you, is that I come from, and a lot of people I go talk to come from the data world. And you described IT, data, information, and knowledge. And I think in the data, from the data and analytics, right, we have metadata, a definition of metadata in this case, right? In our perspective, as a data catalog vendor, we think about the tables on the columns and the lineage and the descriptions of how this is stuff doing. Like that is one set of metadata. But there's these other tools that are also have metadata, and so I think the point here is that there's so many tools, technologies within the landscape of an organization that it all flows. And my understanding here is that you want what the goal of the metagrid is to actually keep track of the flow of how things are interacting. So,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
my question here is, let's get into specifics. What does this tangibly look like? What, who is going to do what that I can touch, and where is that going to live?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my book, yeah, I will answer the question. That there's more underneath it that I perhaps need to explain, but let me first answer the question. What I suggest in my book is a team topology like structure. So I'm very inspired by team topologies. And for those that do not know this universe, it's closely related to everything decentralized. So microservices, data mesh. Team topologies is the organizational answer to this. It's the suggestion of organizing in small teams that take on various roles in various use cases. And I do a little bit the same thing in my book. So I suggest that many of the teams that manage these metadata repositories in the various domains, they group and they form what I refer to as a kind of data, I call it a data discovery team that aligns repositories for specific use cases. And then they create documents, they create diagrams, and they create data sets that can travel. And that can be very refined or it can be very simple. Everything from spreadsheets, import, export, to standard connectors between repositories, to self-created API calls of various sorts. So it's technically, I don't know if you think that is complicated or simple, but anyway, that's how this infrastructure should be set up. But organizationally, if you want someone to point at the deep history of IT projects in an organization, you would want to call up the records and information management team because they have documentation going back several decades if you are in regulated industry. They might be interested in exchanging ideas with a backup team sitting in IT because they have actual backups. That is not archiving. It's not archiving, but it's backup, something else. They might need to align. They could create powerful relations about how past projects was described and carried out throughout or and documented inside the various repositories. So could be architecture decision records. This could be specific integrations, and that is what it is. That's just one small example. So there's no real team carrying this out. It's a lot of teams, but the complexity of what I'm saying is that these teams have no knowledge of each other. The data teams sitting in an organization are very isolated and they look towards what was once called the modern data stack as their universe, right? So that's really it. But outside of that universe, outside of the data domains, are other domains that also describe the same reality, but for different purposes. So the knowledge management domain that I describe, these are specific technologies. Knowledge management systems exist. Quality management systems exist. Content management system exists, right? Learning management systems exist, and companies need those. And these systems describe the same parts of the IT landscape, but for a different purpose. IT management as well. So it sits outside of the IT or the data domain, but IT management is like it's enterprise architecture management tools for strategic thinking. You have more practical thinking in configuration management databases, endpoint management systems, and so forth, right? But they exist, these systems, and they depict the same reality through the metadata they contain.
So if you take kind of what you're saying here and then translate it into specific, I'm just going to use the phrase like entities here. Like,
Yeah.
what is in scope of the meta grid, right? Is it, because like the thing that I think about most in recent history is I think about data mesh, right? And I think about
Hmm.
how the data mesh is trying to be both socio and technical. So there are aspects to data mesh, which is the systems, there are aspects to data mesh, which is the processes and the domains and the products and things like that, right? And so it's kind of a mix of the people and the process and the technology kind of all together. Does that same kind of concept apply to Metagrid as well? And to tie it to what Juan had kind of asked around, like making it tangible, is the tangible manifestation of a Metagrid that you recognize this sort of team topology perspective of different groups of people with different purposes and objectives and different kinds of metadata and sort of purpose that each of those sort of people, process, technology pods are focused on, and then the interoperability between them, or would you characterize the sort of tangible manifestation a little bit differently?
Thank you for a beautifully phrased question, Tim. I think to answer in a simple way, and then we can go into depth about it. The motivation for writing this book and presenting this idea is that companies worldwide are losing a lot of money on consultancy projects and technology implementations and promotions of internal employees, basically repeating the same exercise again and again due to what I call enterprise amnesia, which is the fact that many companies do not understand the IT landscape. It's opaque. So they do not know their integrations. They do not know their processes. They do not know their projects. They do not know the data types. And so they implement technologies. They set up teams. They call in consultants, and they do that again and again and again. I've been in this game for two decades almost, and I've seen it so many times. And the problem is, it's nobody's fault. People are acting in silos, but they're doing this again and again and again. So the purpose of the Metagrid architecture is to try to stop that and say, we have a history, we have a documented understanding of our IT landscape, and it sits in systems that you don't know about because you find yourself isolated with one technology in one domain. But if you look outside of that context, you will see that we have this history, or at least fragments of that history that you're trying to establish from nothing, right? And so that's the purpose of the Metagrid. It's kind of a MacGyver-like approach to really say, stop doing metadata management from the bottom up. It's impossible to reach a perfect state only going from the bottom up, going completely with a new technology and no history, no context. Try to understand what is around you. Learn from that, incorporate that in what you're doing. That would speed up the implementation. It would smoothen the adoption of the technology, and it would cost less. It would be with less friction. So the purpose of the Metagrid is exactly that. And I think many tech vendors, I've been with a tech vendor, but it's not against you. But I think many tech vendors can only scratch the surface of the complexity in big corporations when they see that. They implement their own technology for a specific capability, but this is an enormous problem in big companies. And I've seen it again and again. I've seen it I have my own small consultancy. A lot of companies call me to discuss this with them. And so I've been discussing this with a lot of companies worldwide, and I know it's a problem. And it's likewise for consultancies, right? They are called upon when they have to implement specific technologies. So that's what they do. So no one has the chance really to address the totality of this, but it's addressable and it's useful.
So let me go in. So based on everything we've been talking about, let me give an example, which I believe, if I understood correctly, should match to the Metagrid. So in today's landscape, right, organizations, right, they don't understand. within their own silo, their own department, their own domain, they understand their systems, and they understand probably what's coming into it, and they understand what's going out to it. But basically, my left and right, my neighbors, I probably get that. But how are my neighbors be using that stuff? And maybe something that comes in directly from my system, or maybe somebody completely who I've never talked about is somehow getting my stuff without even knowing they're doing things. So that is kind of the landscape of today. And the problem is that somebody new comes around, or they're trying to go solve a problem, and they need something that I may have, and they may do it on their own. They may repeat that work. They may not even know I exist, so they think that they're right. So this comes in, and then eventually we have this gigantic mix. And then what usually happens, people say we have this big pile of a shit show all over the place, and they bring in consultancies, third-party outsourcing, and we're expecting some outsourcing group come in and saying, oh, let me go interview everybody and go figure out where these landscapes come in. And then they will try to go boil the ocean and make a map of everything, but they don't understand the context of that particular business. They may know obviously the industry domain, but they don't know that particular business and why there was this decision of why this thing goes from one system to another. So when you talk about that the metagrid exists already, is that if we were to talk to the people, which we sometimes don't, we're like, hey, why is this piece of information going from one place to another, right? What are the decisions behind that? Like, and then like none of that sometimes is kept. Maybe things are documented. It's probably documented in code. It's probably documented in some comments inside of code. Maybe it's documented in somebody's GitHub and pull requests. It's maybe in a Confluence document, whatever. But it is not in a place where it's kind of where it is findable, retrievable by anybody else in the organization. And the point of the metagrid here is that you want to document that in a way that anybody who wants to understand more about a particular system or the relationships between systems, they can go find that, and they can go read a document. They can go look at a diagram. They know who to go talk to and saying, oh, I get this. I get it. And if I don't understand something, I have more follow-up questions, I know who to go talk to. So that document, that deliverable, which has been built based on talking to people, by looking at existing kind of code around there and stuff, you are really kind of reverse engineering the processes and the interactions between technology and people and the decisions to be made within the organization. That was a lot.
Two things, and I will mention the things that I want to say, because if not, I will forget them. So first of all, I want to talk about the unconscious metagrid. And then second, I want to talk about the reference librarian. It's a very important concept in this context. So first of all, the unconscious metagrid. I understand if people find that a little abstract. I am formulating my thoughts as to the best of my knowledge, and I do understand that I need to step up a little bit. I'm very certain of what I'm saying, but I'm not. I need to improve the way I'm explaining it. That's for sure. So the unconscious metagrid is the fact that we have implemented all these technologies, and they do reflect the same reality, but they do it in an unconscious way, in the sense that they are not very well aligned, and therefore they are confusing to look at in a totality. If you look at many of the metadata repositories that I discuss in my book, in a typical company, these will not be very well aligned. They will have that people will not trust each other. They will say the data quality in that system is low, and it's because those people don't understand this and that. And so there's a lot of like the sociology of this is really deep. It goes deep, like in organizations, employees, they do not necessarily trust each other. A lot of people want to do good, but trusting other teams and what they have done can be really, really difficult. So the unconscious metagrid is a description I use to explain that we need to move away from these silos of metadata that are intellectually linked because they describe the same reality, but they are not very precisely linked. So the idea of a conscious metagrid is really to improve how they interact, these repositories, make them work smoother together. But it's not a harmonization project. It's not a master data project. I have softened up a little bit on master data lately, but it's not a master data project because you will not have the same meta models across technologies. I can give you a very concrete example of this. If you have an application, it's the example I use the most because it's so easy to explain. If you have an application in a configuration management database, that application needs to be broken down into instances, and they need to be broken down into versions in those instances, because that is what you manage in a configuration management database. It's the actual configurations of the application. That is not necessary if you are a data protection officer. You just need to know that this application processes this kind of data. That's all you need to know. That's good enough. So the meta models are different because the capabilities leveraged by the technologies are different. They will never align. And that is a context that you need to understand. But the configuration management database typically would contain a lot of data that would be relevant for the CISO to have, or the data protection officer to have. So imagine the data protection officer not doing the same mapping exercise of the entire IT landscape in a company. Like imagine how big this is, right? If that person did not interview all the people, the example you just mentioned, or the story you just told, Juan, right? If that person was not supposed to do that, but simply could align through this organizational setup of a metadata group of people that are working on aligning metadata repositories, imagine the time saved. And ESG is coming now, right? And NIS2 is coming now, all these regulations, and you want to do more stuff for innovative purposes. It's hitting organizations, new tools all the time, like all kinds of AI tools are hitting organizations now. And if you don't leverage these capabilities, you will fall behind in the competition. And so new technologies, they hit companies all the time, and it's very, very time consuming and to get them up and running. And they are nourished, they are hydrated by metadata, all these tools. So we're repeating that exercise again and again if we're not coordinating. So that's the one thing I want to say. But I also want to say, can I say another thing?
Go.
I'm just totally ranting here, and I promised myself I wouldn't do this, but I'm doing it anyway. So the reference librarians, it's a very important concept that I describe in my book. And I guess most listeners do not know what a reference librarian is, but back in the days before the internet, if you were searching for data or information or knowledge, you would go to your local library. And if you were lucky, inside that library would be a reference librarian. And a reference librarian could answer questions like, what was the average corn production per farmer in Arkansas in 1935? The reference librarian would take out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 handbooks and assemble an answer from these sources to you, saying the average production of corn in Arkansas in 1935 was approximately this, but you need to take into account that the weather in these parts of the state did that to the production and so forth. Right? That was the role of a reference librarian, coordinating various sources to provide a specific answer. And that is exactly what I do with my book in an IT landscape context. If people are asking, what is this business process? How is it depicted in the various systems that we use? Then this group would be able to assemble and say the metagrid documentation that we have created says that a business process is documented like this in an enterprise architecture management system. It is mirrored in the data privacy repository like this. It is also mirrored once it gets concrete into technology in the CMDB, and it is furthermore also reflected in the information security management system leveraged by the CISO in order to mitigate cyber attacks. So these are the kind of questions that this group would be able to answer.
Is that the virtual group, the group that you're suggesting should be? Okay. So this snippet, I want to go back, kind of starts in minute 38, is the golden nugget of everything we've discussed, right? I mean, let's put MetaGrid aside and all the terms and all that stuff. Like that should be the vision. And it goes back to like my comment about like what does this tangibly look like? I'm like, and you just gave me the example that's the example. In an organization, we should be able to go to a place which has people or agents, whatever, and I should be able to ask a question like that, and they should be able to go and get back documents, references, and say, oh, so to answer that question, here is this whole flow. And by the way, how did you come up with that question? Oh, because there's this document that represents this relationship between A and B, and there's this other one that represents B and C, and this other one that represents C and E, and you're the one, and you're interested from A and E. So I put it all together for you, right? And if you have any questions, we can keep digging into that. So I think that for me, like that is the North Star, given that example. And your point is that having this notion of what you're calling the MetaGrid gets us to that North Star.
Yeah, I mean, it's very kind of you to say all this, Juan. So, and this is why I bluntly say that I know I'm right, but I'm honestly not sure if I can explain it very well. But I'm trying to the best of my efforts. But you know, the problem for an IT landscape and for an enterprise context is that no single technology will look outside of its leverage capability. But many technologies think that they answer everything. There are many technologists, be it software vendors, be it consultants, or be it internal employees. It doesn't matter. It's not to say that it's you guys. They tend to think that their technology is the answer to these questions, but it's never the total answer to these questions, because there will be a context around these technologies for other purposes in an organization, and that is the way it's supposed to be. Okay. I can't see any technology doing anything else than what it's supposed to do. So I think that's
I think we're in agreement here on what this looks like. And I think that the step one here is recognize that knowledge about all this stuff, that MetaGrid, saying it already exists, and we should go from that unconscious to the conscious version, right? Saying, okay, this is probably not tangible, it's not documented, we should go do that. But then actually, let me bring up Andrea's point here is like, well, how do we scale how do we scale this? How do we scale the reference librarian model in the digital world? The complexity of all the metadata repositories is far behind the cognitive capacity of one team. So to follow up on this, and just looking at time, because we know that we can talk about hours and hours. And by the way, come to Austin in January, and we'll be talking about hours and hours and hours about this. So
yeah, wonderful.
And so how would you answer that to Andrea? And to follow up on that is, I really want to understand, like, what's the call to action? Like, what are the activities that need to be created, and what needs? We got step one. Let's acknowledge this. We acknowledge the problem. Acknowledge that this unconsciously exists. We should make it conscious. How do we continue?
Well, I published the MetaGrid manifesto on my website and on LinkedIn, and I think what most people noticed was that I called the MetaGrid small, simple, and slow. So to be a little provocative, I'm not sure we need to scale this.
Whoa, that is a profound, honest, no BS. Global.
Yeah, and so contrary to microservices and data mesh is super, and I'm happy that you're asking the question, Andrea. I look forward to catch up. So the reason why we need to scale data mesh, or let me put it in a different way. Data mesh allows for scalability. We want scalability with data mesh. That's the whole point. We unlock bottlenecks so that data can travel faster from provider to consumer because there's no centralized team, right? So we can scale the usage of data, and we can act faster than our competitors based on that. And thus scalability is cool. It's great. I'm not sure I want to scale the metagrid. I don't see the reason why. I'm building something very solid here. I'm building a fortress. And the next time Big Four consultants come to my company and say they want to map business processes because they have a higher salary than me and they know better how to map business processes than me, I just tell them, no, don't come. I have my business process mapped. I don't need your service. I don't need your technology. We got it under control. That's the idea of the metagrid.
In a way, how I'm interpreting this is that you want to be able to represent the business, your organization's business processes, but for the ones that you care about and that people care about, and it may not be all of them, right? Maybe actually, probably it's like you want to start understanding the ones that people ask the most questions about. Right? There's some probably things around A and Z that people are not asking. It's like, so no, I don't need to go scale the meta grid to go understand that stuff. I'm going to go start with the stuff. And if it happens that people are start to ask questions about we understand corn productions in Arkansas, but then we have no idea about wheat. But then suddenly we start getting questions about wheat. Maybe I should go find out about wheat and then get that in. And then I'm able to go do that. So at that point, I'll scale it.
I don't think that's scaling. I think that's expanding. Scalability for me is something else, and it's not to be pedantic. It's not to be pedantic. Scalability depends on technology.
Okay.
You can scale certain things through the right technological setup, but expanding a context of what the metagrid entails is simply arranging a meeting and creating documents and perhaps writing an API call. That's really it. So I think. And so business processes are just one example, right? Projects would be another, applications another. But we can go very deep into the technical layers. I mean, I definitely discuss transit gateways, servers. I mean, I don't have any particular preference for very abstract topics such as product names or what have you, right? You can go deep into the technical layers of this. And it's also very necessary. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of risk, and a lot of poor daily operations that are due to technical mistakes. So for example, just the cost of an application, right? If you don't know how many people that are using your application, how many licenses you have, and what they cost, and who pays for them, then basically you're out of control, right? And this is like, it sounds a little boring, but it's an enormous problem in all companies. It's really, really like the cost of an IT landscape in most industrial companies. It's enormous, and it evolves very fast. So if you're a startup and you have like an IT landscape of 20 applications, then you don't see this problem. But once you have 5-10 years of company history, then things start to get very, very complicated. No one knows the integrations between the application. No one even knows the application landscape, right? That's pretty horrible reality, but it's the fact.
So how do you respond to folks that say, okay, understood, Ole, like, we want to be very deliberate about how we go about this. And we want things to be under control, right? How do you respond to somebody who says, but doesn't that go against agility, the ability to move quickly?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of things you can't do through agility. I think you can't you can't do many basic data management tasks through agility. I don't have anything against agility, but it's a framework that was born out of software production, right? So if your company implementing agility for everything tech, then I think but you see that a lot, right? Whether or not that works, I'll be a little discreet about, I think. But I understand your question, Tim. I think it would be anyway.
I think you're unpacking a pretty cool, honest, no BS nugget. You know, Juan and I love these honest, no BS moments, which is that, you know, I'll say the whole world, right? Maybe that's a bit presumptuous, but I'll say the whole world, but maybe especially in the United States, I'll scapegoat the United States a little bit here. There's an obsession with agility. We're so obsessed with, like, we have to move fast. React to the dynamic landscape, right? And, you know, make decisions quickly, empower, right?
This is the reminder of the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, right?
Yeah. And we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking fast and very much not enough thinking slow.
And we like to say, yeah, we should invest in our foundations, and we should slow down to speed up and all that stuff, but we don't do it. And that's a very American thing. I agree, right? It's like a Silicon Valley. You got to move fast, right? We're all working, right? We're workaholics and we work all the time.
Fast,
and right? The Europeans, they work 35 hours and they take a month on vacation, right? Like, I mean, that's a cultural thing, right? Like, I agree with him. And I think this is. I would actually go and to go think about this a little bit more. What's going to happen? But what could happen is organizations, U.S.-centric organizations, are going to saying, this is not aligning with my agility, and then you'll see other maybe European-based organizations saying, taking the time to go do this. I can see a future like that, but
I think I mean, I understand the context of agility and that you would sometimes. I mean, I think of my my dear grandfather that I used to hike a lot together with him in the Pyrenees when I was a kid, and he said, like, do you want to go fast or do you want to reach the top the first? What do you want to do? I mean, we can go fast, but you'll never get to the top as the first one. And so that, I think that captures like the essence of that agility, right? Because if you burn all that energy in the beginning of climbing a big mountain, then you will not go far.
And this is sorry, but this is like not anything against Andrea with this question about scalability, but this is a typical thing when you go talk to anybody. You're selling something as a technology vendor. What question you'll get from the prospect? How does this scale, right? Right. You're pitching to your VCs and like, well, how does your technology scale? How is your business scale? Everything's about scale and scale and scale. So I love how you bring it up that for this meta-grid and how to think about it, it doesn't have to.
No. The idea is to, and I've met Andrea in person, and I'm a big fan, and I look very much forward to reading his book, Managing Data Products. I think the title is from Pact. I look really forward to it, Andrea. So do not get me wrong, and bear on me if you get me wrong. But no, I don't think that the meta-grid should scale. I don't think the meta-grid gets more quality by scaling. In fact, maybe you would even try to push against scalability. But that said, outside of the world of agility and scalability, we are discussing things that are unfortunately not up for debate. You have to run an IT landscape. Running an IT landscape entails understanding where your physical infrastructure is, where your endpoints are, what kind of applications are installed on these endpoints, and what kind of sensitive data they are treating. It also entails, if you are in regulated industry, that you have documented learning processes. It's very boring, I know, but it's something that is not up for discussion. You will not be in business a very long time if you do not respect these regulations or these standards that you need to comply with. So that is part of the meta-grid. It is something that is not up for debate. So whether you want to go fast or slow or big or small, it's just there. So it will be there anyway. It's already there. The metagrid is already there, but it is poorly managed for things that I discuss in the chapter that I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like people have sometimes good intentions when it comes to metadata. Sometimes they do not, and sometimes they manage it very poorly. So
Yeah.
that's a small sociology of metadata that I put into the book because it's necessary. Like there's nothing easier than implementing a new technology to get a promotion in a company, right? But is it the right thing to do it, and how do you do it?
Well said. So, final question here before we go into some of our takeaways. What is your call to action for those who are listening, right, and thinking about how do I, if I want to start to take the next steps to embrace, the positive impact that Metagrid could have, what would be your call to action for folks?
I would say if you are in a position where your metadata repository is lacking quality, or you're trying to implement a new metadata repository for a specific context, try to look at the list of teams that I have in my book. Try to explore the domains outside of your own domain and the technologies are over there, because it will ease the implementation of your technology, and it will most likely make it more solid. That's a way to start.
I love that. If you are in this situation where your metadata repository is lacking context, or you're trying to introduce a new context, look at these different domains and how they're described, and you will save yourself a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah, and you will get some new friends.
Oh, I like that. Go talk to other people and make new friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then something, and I think again, I'm thinking about very tangibly. We discussed this before. It's like you want to document the relationship between these systems. And I think you brought up, like, you have a template or something that you're looking at, right? That people can be able to go almost fill out in a way, like, this is how you would describe what this is, and this is a representation of that metagrid.
Yeah. Yes. So maybe I didn't catch the question correctly, Juan, but I definitely have such a template in my book. I didn't invent it. Architecture decision records. There are several kinds of templates for architecture decision records, but that's really it. You document why you took a specific choice on representing a specific type of metadata in a specific way in this repository, and how you transport it to other repositories. In those repositories, you can create the same kind of documentation. It's very lightweight. It doesn't take up a lot of space. A page will be it will be enough, right? Then you will do a diagram of another page, and then you would perhaps have a spreadsheet with some data, or like a more advanced stuff with an API call, but it's not that advanced, right? And that's pretty much it. Right? It's just getting these things more solidly connected across metadata repositories.
In back channeling here with Tim, also, we were like, you have this in place, then you can make smarter decisions about the technology investments that you want to make.
Sure.
I mean, that's just one thing that you'd be able to go at, right? But
you would be able to, like, all my practical experience, everyone I've talked to, consulted for, tells me that if you have a firm metagrid documented and well managed, you will be able to cut the spend of your IT landscape, the spend of the consultants you have doing new projects, remarkably.
That's important right there. Well, as you can see, we're at an hour, and we didn't do our lightning round because we're like, well, this is the discussion. I want to get going, but we still want to do our takeaways, and let's see how this goes. Before we do takeaways, very quickly, why the word grid?
Yeah, I try to not joke too much when I'm on podcasts, but But the real honest no BS explanation of this is that my wife came up with this term, and I need to respect that. And it's a great term. I really love it. But I think Scott Taylor nailed it perfectly, saying that it should just have been called the metadata grid. But anyway, it's the metagrid because it's as small. So there's also a deeper meaning behind it. The idea is that it's not a complete ontology. The instance of the metadata that you connect is specific instances. It will never extrapolate to a complete ontology. It's not a graph. So that's the idea behind it. But anyway, that's why I call it that.
Well, I do want to call out something before we're going to takeaways. I know people were reaching out to me, getting into like, oh, how is this related to graphs and knowledge graphs and stuff? And I purposely did not want to get into that. Just so people with me, because that would have gotten into the technology conversation. And I think that's on purposely what we're not trying to go do here. And I think at the end of the day, how we're wrapping this up is that we really, anyways, we're going to wrap it up in the takeaways. So, Tim, take us away with takeaways.
All right, I'll do my best here. So we've really started off with, honest no BS. What is the metagrid? And you started off with just a little bit of grounding and context that like, hey, look, this is, even though there's a lot about this that sounds abstract, and just to be frank, there are several aspects of it that are abstract, right? That really, it all comes back to actually a very practical perspective of work that needs to get done, people's, things that they need to accomplish, and how do we do that in the smartest way, the most effective way possible. And you said that what the metagrid is it's a set of decision records architected, right, on how to define certain things in the IT landscape in certain repositories, and how these things change over time as they move into other repositories for different capabilities. And I think what's really important about that is it's about the relationships between these different things. And it's, as you mentioned, both in place, that metadata is in place where it is, as well as it lives somewhere else so that it can be discovered and understood and interconnected. So it is actually in two places at once. And I think that's a little bit of a new perspective to think about metadata. It broadens and constrains, depending on how you look at it, kind of how you think about what constitutes metadata. Vendors say that they can expose everything in metadata, but that is not true. A data catalog should not be ServiceNow, right? I think that's a very tangible example that explains that these things have different purposes, different metadata, and yet they benefit from each other, and they benefit from knowing that each of these has their unique purposes, and then can benefit by bringing some of that together in that intelligence together. You brought up team topology. And actually, just for a personal anecdote, I really love the team topology kind of perspective. I actually really try to implement a lot of it on the product management side of what I do, because I think that when you really embrace building products with, okay, you've got outcome-oriented teams, and you've got platform-oriented teams, and enablement-oriented teams, and each of them have different purposes, and they each have to have their focus and their separation, and yet they must use a common language. That kind of idea can be applied in a lot of different ways, and it applies very beautifully, I think, to how you're thinking about metagrid. So I love the connection to the team topology approach there. I think it applies to a lot of things, and folks should take an action to learn more about this team topology concept and think about how it applies to their own domains. And then finally, for my takeaways here, before I pass it to Juan, you helped to unpack the problem that you're trying to solve here. Like, companies don't know why other parts of the organization are doing things, how they do things, why they do things. And we're repeating this disconnect and this problem over and over and over. It often manifests itself in the consultants, the expensive consultants that you're having to bring in, and you pay them ridiculous amounts of money to analyze your business and provide you insights back, such that you can then read a fancy report or look at a fancy, a set of slides, 100 slides that basically tell you kind of what you already know, but maybe articulated in a better way. And then, of course, take too few actions to actually leverage for value. So, we have to fight this enterprise amnesia. We need to stop doing metadata management from the bottom up. We have history, and we have to leverage that context in their various domains. So anyway, so much more. I could go on for a lot more, but Juan, over to you. What are your takeaways?
So the other one is the unconscious metagrid, right? We have this, it already exists, and we have been implementing these technologies, and it's been done in an unconscious way. And many of these metadata repositories are not well aligned, and that's what results in a lack of trust and so much quality issues and things. And but those relationships there are there, right? So like that, it's there. You said the big nugget for me is the notion of the reference librarian, right? So we go to the library, you would find a reference librarian. You can ask the question, what is the average corn production in Arkansas in 1935? And they would actually go in and bring in the different sources and coordinate and help you get to an answer. So I think that is kind of like that North Star that we should go to, which is this is the golden nugget to enable that unified yet nuanced view of this context. Now the question is, how does this scale? How do we scale that reference librarian in this digital world? And your point is maybe we shouldn't scale this. The point of the metagrid is to build something that is solid. Right? I have my business process mapped. I don't need your services, expensive consultants. I have this under control, but I should be able to understand and manage this stuff. And it's really not a question about scaling. It's about expanding, because scaling is based on technology, and that expansion will happen little by little. And this is deliberate. We talked a lot about the agility, right? There's a lot that you can't do with agility. If this is one of those core principles, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. And an honest OBS thing you said in passing, but I just want to call it out, is a lot of people implement these technologies just to get a promotion. I think that's also kind of a big source of stuff. So our final call to action is if you're in a position where your metadata repository is lacking context, or you need to add new context, you got this book coming out, go look at it, go see the domains that you're suggesting, and figure out that will easy implementations of that technology can result in that better outcome. And guess what? You'll talk to more people and make new friends. And then there's like templates of how you would document to go create and document that metagrid. And with the well-documented metagrid, things that would come out of it, cut spend of IT landscape and cut the spend of consultants and stuff. That was a lot. How did we do?
I'm very impressed and honored, and I'm also happy that I managed to explain myself. I think that's what I really need to rehearse at. Now Lynn Bender gave me the opening keynote at Data Day Texas in January. I need to nail like the short pitch of this idea in some kind of way. So I'll be practicing that a lot. I'm very thankful that I got my ideas through here. I can definitely tell that you understood what I'm communicating, and I'm actually quite impressed with your takeaways, and it's really succinct. So thank you.
So listen to the podcast. And actually, what you should tell people is the homework for the keynote is to go listen to the podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, no, just joke aside. All right, as always, to wrap up, 3 final questions. What's your advice? Who should we invite next? And what resources do you follow?
Oh, those questions I didn't prepare for. So can I get them again from the beginning?
What's your advice about data, metadata, life?
I think for metadata, to stay on topic, do not start from scratch. That's it. And the next question?
Who should invite next?
So many good people. I think I know a lot of people now in France and in Helsinki in Sweden, in Finland and in Sweden and in Norway, like in the Nordics. So maybe one person that I think you should talk to is Winfried in Oslo. He's originally German, but he lives in Oslo, or maybe outside Oslo in Norway. Winfried Adelbert Etzel, he's called. That guy, he has something interesting to say.
All right.
Okay.
I know.
And what resources do you follow?
Oh, yeah. So I follow a lot of podcasts, a lot of data podcasts, and recently I've been expanding outside the data domain to really be able to contextualize. So many podcasts on information management, knowledge management, uh, and then also people on LinkedIn. So many people that I could mention. Recently, I've been quite thrilled to discover practitioners that. So I've been talking a lot to practitioners lately. For example, someone called Anna Ibrahim from UK. I think she's very skilled, but there are many people that I follow on LinkedIn, on Substack, and on Medium.
I think the beauty, we all started this conversation about these decentralized, the social media and all that stuff. At the end of the day, what I'm really appreciated is this community, this data community, which is so open and just open for these conversations to be had. And very thankful to meet so many people that have become friends, as you, Ole. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Juan and Tim.
Well, with that, thank you, my friend. I'm glad we had this honest, no BS discussion, and we're going to have more of it in Austin, Texas. Come over to Day to Day Texas and use the code Honest No BS to get a discount.
It's honestly also Honest No BS, one of the best data conferences out there, right? It's low key, but very clever people bouncing ideas.
Cheers, everybody.